creating wealth, freedom, and security using real estate investing. This is Get Real Wealthy.
All right, this is part 4 in the Young Adult series. We're going to be talking about the FIRE movement a little bit. So if you had done your homework from the last episode, you would know that the FIRE acronym stands for Financial Independence and Retire Early. It's a community online that talks a lot about this. Now, it's very not typical to be in a community like this, and it's why I encourage you to participate in these type of communities, because it's different than what your parents may be interested in. So it moves away from the typical, work hard, get a good education, and retire in 30, 40, or 50 years from now, okay? It's something that's not typical. And really, it's about understanding what you can do in order to get there. And there are a lot of different approaches to doing this. So there is the FIRE movement. So the FIRE movement is having a large nest egg and being able to live off of that large nest egg. Maybe it takes you 5 years or 10 years or 20 years to create that large nest egg, but you live off that large nest egg. Then there is the lean FIRE community. So the lean FIRE community is really about being frugal and living minimalistically, or perhaps an anti-consumer type behavior. And that living frugally allows you to create an environment where your monthly freedom number, that is the costs related to your accommodation, your food, and your transportation, are so low that it becomes easy for you to have that financial freedom. Then there is another movement called the barista FIRE movement, which means that you continue to work while you're retired, but you get some sort of additional benefits that allows you to continue to work. So perhaps, you're looking for a drug plan benefit or some other type of benefit, but you've created the financial freedom part, but just not all of the pieces that you need to continue. So you may be interested in that movement. And then there's the Coast FIRE movement, which means investing early enough to generate income in order to retire later, which sounds a little bit more traditional, but it could be later as in 10 to 15 years from now. And if you're starting at 18 or 16, then that's not so far off. So there are a lot of different types of movements even within the FIRE community. And the best thing that you can do if you want to learn something is be around other people who are doing the same thing as you. When you're wanting to learn about real estate investing, you need to be in a community where people are also learning about real estate investing. If you want to learn about stock options and how to use stocks in order to create income, you want to be around a community of people who are learning about stock option trading. It's really important to do that. And joining a community like the FIRE community is a way for you to be able to do that. The other thing that you need to understand is the difference between assets and liabilities. Now, this is a non-traditional approach to assets and liabilities. Assets are things that pay you to own every month. And liabilities are things that you have to pay every month that that own you almost. And this is an interpretation really from Robert Kiyosaki. And if you haven't read any of Robert Kiyosaki's books, that's probably a good start. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and some of those books. But when you understand what assets are, that they pay you every month, and a liability is what you pay every month, it makes you think about things a little differently. So for example, is a car an asset or is it a liability? Well, It's an asset in that it provides transportation for you, and you may think of it as an asset, but it's a liability because you're paying for it every month. Now, an asset grows in value, and typically a car depreciates. It loses value over time. It typically doesn't increase in value. Okay, so that's another criteria for an asset. What's an example of an asset? Well, a real asset could be, let's say, gold and silver, okay, or silver. Silver is an inexpensive asset to own. You can buy an ounce of silver or a silver coin for $20, and that is something that sits. You don't have to pay additional fees to own that asset. You hold on to that asset. You can put it in a safe. You can put it in your drawer. And then 10 years from now, if you looked at that asset again, it's probably going to be worth more than what it costs when you bought it. So that asset has increased in value, okay? We look at rental property that way. We buy a rental property, maybe we buy something for $170,000, and then 10 years later, it's worth $600,000. That asset is something that is increased in value. Also, that asset provides cash flow every month. It's not an expense every month, okay? We want to see a positive income that's brought from that asset, okay? And so that becomes an asset on my balance sheet. A liability is something that costs me money every month to own, okay? That is something that I own, but doesn't necessarily provide additional income for it. So that's a difference between asset and liability. Again, it's not the traditional way of thinking about it, but it's a good way to get started. And you need to define for yourself, what is an asset, what is a liability. The next piece that we'll talk a little bit about is good debt, bad debt, and opportunity debt. Now, we're going to go into more detail in a future episode, but good debt is something that you can go in debt in, but it is an asset. Okay, it provides you income, like that rental property. Bad debt is debt that you take on, but it's not necessarily an asset. It's a liability because you're gonna have to pay for it. It could be you go into debt to go on vacation, and because you go to debt to go on vacation, you end up having to pay for that vacation a year in order to pay it back. So that's a bad debt. An opportunity debt is having access to debt in order to perhaps later on use it for good debt, okay? So having opportunity debt is something that I suggest everybody works towards. They work towards having access to debt, but not necessarily using it for bad debt, saving it so that they can use it for good debt in the future. There's also the difference between living paycheck to paycheck versus what's called the golden handcuffs. So paycheck to paycheck is what a majority of Canadians do. They get a paycheck and then they spend it every month. They don't necessarily have anything left at the end or very little at the end to save because they've created a situation where their accommodation, their food, and their transportation is equal to their paycheck. And it's very possible that you can continue to live doing that, but if your accommodation or your food or your transportation goes up, it becomes harder and harder to get out of that situation. And that's where a majority of Canadians are, paycheck to paycheck. So what you need to do is make sure that your budget allows you to be below what you have in each paycheck so that you have funds that can go towards different things. The other situation is golden handcuffs. It's where you're in a situation where you get a lot of income, but you end up spending it because of your lifestyle every month. It's very much the same as paycheck to paycheck, but you wouldn't necessarily give it up. Because you've got the income that's coming in, the amount of work you do is something you can do on a daily basis. It's not something extra, and you feel very comfortable where you are, so you decide to stay in that situation. But again, it comes from income from some sort of employer, and that's something that prevents you from growing or changing in a different way because you have these golden handcuffs. Perhaps there's some benefit that you get that's something in the future that's being held over, like a pension or something else that you may get 10 or 20 years from now, but it prevents you from growing or going into a different direction. So that means that you just stay what you're doing because of those golden handcuffs. Something you probably don't hear every day. Anyways, what I want you to continue to do is, if you started to explore the FIRE acronym in the FIRE community, I want you to look at Fat Fire, Lean Fire, Barista Fire, Coast Fire. See which one appeals to you as a young person and see which direction you would like to go in, and decide that this is the type of direction I want to be. I want you to start participating into that community. Add to that community. Listen to podcasts around that community. Read blogs about that community. Learn, maybe read a book on that community. That's your homework for this episode. If you want to learn more about investing in real estate, about learning about financial freedom as a young adult, make sure you listen to this series and get back to getrealwealthy.com, where you can learn more about me and what I'm doing in investing in real estate. Have a great one, everyone.
Make sure to check out getrealwealthy.com.
Until next time, I'm Quentin D'Souza. Get out there and take action.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are provided for information purposes only and should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell any securities or to make or consider any investment or course of action. For more information, go to getrealwealthy.com.